You're live.
I'm not live. We've been over this. None of this needs to actually go in the videos. When are you going to get that into your head? Hello, my loves, and welcome back to this little bookish corner of the internet. I am back sooner today than I thought I was going to be, which is exciting. I made my grand return after my 17th hiatus this year to BookTube a few days ago, and I think the people who saw that video really enjoyed it. So if you want just a little life update plus some recent favourites, you can head over there and watch me generally be a goof. I think myself and my cameraman were on pretty good form when we filmed that video. But anyway, I am back today with the first part of my non-fiction November wrap-up. Because I was kind of absent on BookTube, I wasn't very vocal about the fact that I was participating in non-fiction November, but I will link the channels down below of the lovely people who started non-fiction November, so you can go investigate if by any chance you've been living under a rock and you haven't heard of it. But in the meantime, I read some really great things and also a couple not so great things. Okay. Don't drink eggnog before you start shooting a video, because otherwise it's going to be difficult. On that note, we have some lightly spiked eggnog for seasonal appropriateness. It's quite good, except I just brushed my teeth and I just think that that combination is not the one. Anyway, I read some good things and some not so good things in the month of non-fiction November. I really, really enjoyed reading this much non-fiction. So today we're going to talk about 4, I hope, books that I read in November, and then I will come back to you with the other 3 in another video. So without further ado, or with ado, because I forgot to say, congratulations Alabama for doing the right thing and not electing a child molester. Let's all just give a round of applause to Alabama. Okay. Regularly scheduled non-political content. When is it ever non-political? Speaking of, the first book that we need to talk about is a French book called, I have the English title here, which is not helpful, Et tu n'es pas revenu, or But You Did Not Come Back, by Marcelline Loridian-Ivens. Now, Marcelline is a French filmmaker who was born in, I believe, the year 1928. And this is a memoir / letter to her father that basically chronicles her story from age 15 onwards. At age 15, she was taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau and with her father and was subsequently separated from him. The whole book is a tiny punch in the gut. It brings everything you imagine would come with that story: grief, fear, and also the kind of humanness that only comes out in those absolutely horrific situations. All of that is there in this tiny book. It's really unsentimental, almost as if she knows that there's already too much sentimentality in all the media that surrounds the war, and that the kind of terror that they experienced just isn't adequately described by that kind of sentimentality. She doesn't want to help the reader to wear poetic rose-coloured glasses, even though it's written quite beautifully. But man, is it emotive. So you kind of strip away to the bare minimum to this love letter from a daughter to her father, and all you have left are the raw emotions associated with that. It's so beautiful and so hard to read. I found myself almost crying at multiple points in the book. I think what I found particularly interesting is the fact that the act of writing this letter, and I don't know, I think some of it was written at the time, I think the act of writing it meant hanging on to kind of some last dregs of sanity and realizing that she was able to somewhat make sense of what was happening to her. And even the bits that were written after this all happened as a memoir kind of felt like a means of assimilating all the horrors that she'd experienced. And the disappearance of her father, and how absolutely horrific that is to deal with as a 15-year-old girl, especially because they did happen to have a very, very close relationship. There's a particularly poignant moment where her father does manage to not bring her a note, but send her a note with someone, with a guard or whoever. And she hangs on to this note for dear life, as if she knows that it will be the last thing of her father's that will exist. So yes, absolutely beautiful and well worth the couple of hours it might take you to read. I've read a lot of things about the war, and this was probably one of the best. And also, you know, it's in French, so that's nice too. The next book we have to talk about is The Glass Castle by Jeanette. Now, this has been pretty much everywhere recently because relatively recently they made a movie adaptation with Brie Larson, who, by the way, I love Brie Larson. If you haven't seen Rome from a couple of years ago, you should absolutely see it. That's also an adaptation from a book by Emma Donoghue, which I loved. In this case, if you don't know, Jeanette Walls is an American journalist, author, and she was a columnist, I believe, for MSNBC for a good while. I didn't really know much about her. I don't know, is she famous in America, Mel? Jeanette Walls, have you heard of her?
I don't think I've ever heard of her, but that doesn't
preclude her from being famous. Okay, she might be famous, he might be uninformed. Who knows, the jury's out. Anyway, this is her memoir, kind of discussing her childhood, and she had a really difficult, unfortunate childhood. She grew up with an alcoholic father and a mother who suffered from bipolar disorder. Her parents were really quite nomadic and unresponsible. Unresponsible? What the heck kind of English am I speaking? Her parents were kind of nomadic and irresponsible. As a result, she had a weird childhood where she didn't stay in one place for a very long time, and she kind of had to take a lot of responsibility for herself at an early age. There's a scene where she was cooking hot dogs for herself at age 3 and obviously gets burned really severely, because I don't think you're supposed to be cooking hot dogs on your own at age 3. Now, it's not often that I give a bad review on this channel. Maybe that's because of BookTube, because I have a whole bunch of wonderful people that I trust, and that's where I get most of my book recommendations from these days. And this book was super highly reviewed. People love it on Goodreads, people love it on Amazon, and people thought it was touching, poignant. People were really interested in her story. And I don't know if I read a different book or what happened, but it just didn't do it for me at all. It makes it really clear the kind of negative effect that it can have on children to grow up in unstable households, where the kind of line between just an unfortunate situation with your parents and abuse begins, and what kind of behaviour is abusive on the part of parents, and whether that's always entirely their fault, and, you know, the effect of alcoholism and mental illness on children and on the people who are suffering from those problems. It makes all that clear. It, you know, questions all those things, but somehow to me it did that with very little depth, very little self-reflection. When I read a memoir, I kind of want the person who's telling me their story to reflect on that as an adult, especially if it's a memoir about their childhood, and really delve into what that meant for them. In the end, Jeanette Walls does end up in New York with a fairly good job. She ends up working for MSNBC, but that kind of jump between that difficult childhood that she had and the success in New York is really cloudy to me and unclear, and I just don't get it. I kind of want from a memoir something that is self-reflective and that shows self-awareness, but also kind of makes whatever struggle it's talking about universal, so that when I read your memoir, I either understand more about who you are and the struggles that your particular demographic faces, maybe, or I can relate it to an aspect of my own life or something I might have experienced, which is not always a thing, but I either want to learn or I want to identify, or both. And neither of those things happened. The writing is nothing special. To me, it was kind of sparse. It felt sometimes that she was trying to make it seem novelistic, but I don't think that really worked either. I just didn't like it. A bit of a bust. The third book that we have to talk about is, I don't know if I want to say my guilty pleasure because I don't feel guilty at all about it, but it's called Encyclopedia of an Ordinary Life by Amy Krouse Rosenthal. And this is so lovely. All I want to do when I talk about it is smile, and sadly it's one of those books that nothing I say about it will make you want to read it because it's so weird and it's so extraordinary in its ordinariness, and to that end I think that it definitely won't be everyone's wheelhouse, and that's okay. It's the kind of book that the whole time I was reading it, it made me go, oh my gosh, someone else thinks that too. Oh my gosh, me too. And I just love identifying to that degree with the book. It's kind of written like an encyclopedia, hence why it's called Encyclopedia of an Ordinary Life. And it's just peppered with observations and little anecdotes. And if you know anything about Amy Krouse Rosenthal, she wrote a lot of children's books, and that's kind of her way of writing. She likes to observe things about the world around her. She liked the mundane and, like I say, the ordinary, and she liked to make that important and something that you should focus on, and that's what this book is. So we have observations about marriage, about writing, about street signs, about love, about food, about car number plates. She absolutely loved wordplay, and that's another thing that I adored about this book. It's definitely not literary with a capital L, whatever the hell that means these days, and I think that's kind of wonderful. It celebrates words just because they exist rather than to be pretentious, and I think that's kind of a big fuck you to the people who say that we should only be reading classics and quote important books, unquote whatever they are. But I just know that I will remember things from that book and things about the way that she saw the world for the rest of my life, and I'm grateful for that. She is a brilliant writer. She went viral at the beginning of this year, just before she sadly died of cancer. She wrote a modern love piece for the New York Times. If you don't read Modern Love or listen to the podcast, you should absolutely, it's very wonderful. But she wrote a column called something like, "You Should Probably Date My Husband," and it was about how much she was going to miss her husband because sadly she was in her last days of life, but it was also about what would make him wonderful as a partner for someone else. And it is one of the most beautiful essays I've ever read. If you've not read it, I'll link it in the description, and you should absolutely read it. So by all accounts, she is an absolutely brilliant writer. In this though, she shows that, but it's also just kind of like sitting with a friend. She's gonna take you under her wing. You know, I felt like kind of like I was listening to Mother Hen, someone who'd lived a lot more life than me, and who was kind of just showing me what was special about her day. She was telling me about random serendipitous moments in life, about how if you look hard enough, it's really not that hard to find connection and importance and weird coincidences in the mundane. She was absolutely obsessed with coincidence. In fact, I'll link her TED talk in the down bar where she talks a lot about coincidence. And even though I don't believe in the supernatural or, you know, horoscopes or any of that stuff, and nor did she, I do love serendipity, and I do think that there is such a thing as, you know, random serendipitous moments, and it doesn't really matter how you made that connection, it just matters that you made it, and she believed that very strongly. So that was the first of her books that I read this month, and I loved it, and it's probably best to dip in and out of. But if you like books with a kind of wacky narrative structure and don't mind stuff that you can kind of jump back and forth from, then I'm sure that you would love it. And then right after I was done with Encyclopedia of an Ordinary Life, and I mean right after, I picked up textbook Amy Krouse Rosenthal by Amy Krouse Rosenthal. This is another non-fiction, and it was the last book she wrote, and it was written in 2016 before she had been diagnosed with cancer. And I knew I was going to love it because I'd loved Encyclopedia so much. Much like Encyclopedia, it was very unconventionally written, like a lot of white space. It was kind of made up of the same things, this kind of waltz with language that she had, words dancing across the pages in more ways than one, and just observations about all the things that had happened in life. And speaking of making things universal, man, is she good at that. Anything that happened to her in life and any connection that she made, she had this gift of being able to make it apply to your life too. And with textbook, I felt that so strongly. It's again a memoir, but it's split up like a textbook. So you have history, geography, social studies, a whole bunch of subjects and an index and all of those things. And within those categories are her observations and her poetry and her wordplay and her humour and just her life jumping off the page. One of the exciting things about this book is that it's interactive. Now, I know some people think that those types of things are gimmicky. I get a bit of a kick out of them, so I was excited. Basically, she has this text line that you could text and you would get automatic responses from her. But everything that everyone texts to that number, as long as they didn't say that they wanted it to be confidential, is amalgamated on a website that was set up to go with the publication of the book. So she encouraged her readers, for example, when talking about sunsets, to take a picture of the next sunset and send it. You were encouraged to send your wishes in a virtual bottle for the next year. You were encouraged to send little poems based on prompts in the book. Now, of course, you could read the book and still get a lot of it without texting, but to me, there's something really poetic about that kind of collective voice of readers, and the type of person who was willing to send into that text line was obviously a certain type of person in terms of trying to see the poetry in the world and believing in the power of the group, which Amy definitely did. So I thought that was really beautiful. Some of my stuff is on that website. You can look if you can find it. And I kind of love, even though it breaks my heart, I kind of love that interactivity stands even now that she's gone, because I think that's what she would have wanted. She loved the idea of collective projects, and that's quite clear in her work, and she loved the idea of keeping on people's legacies and, you know, having conversations with strangers and all of those things. So I think she would have loved it. I also think that it's super cool that she's trying to bring that kind of playfulness that exists in children's books to adult nonfiction and memoirizing. Is that a word? Memoirizing. Because she wrote a lot of children's books and they were very playful and they were full of wordplay, and they trusted kids to understand those things, and they believed in the intelligence of children. And I think she brought that to the adult literary world, and I'm grateful. So I will leave a bunch of links to do with Amy in the description, because she really is a beautiful, wonderful, amazing rabbit hole to fall into on the internet, and I miss her. And yeah, I'll just let you fall into that rabbit hole if you're interested, and if you love what you see in her TED Talk and all those things, then I'm sure you'd love her book. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of this 2-parter. I had a really good nonfiction November. Totally normal that I'm filming my wrap up in mid-December and then it probably won't be up for a couple of weeks, but I will see you soon with the second part of the wrap up. Read some pretty funny and interesting stuff, so I look forward to talking to you about it. And in the meantime, I hope that you are feeling festive. I am not. I don't know why, probably because I haven't seen enough Christmas trees, but I'm looking forward to getting home to London. And hey, if you want to feel festive, I made a cool Christmas themed video last year, and I may make another one this year. It was just like a really short thing to show you how I celebrate Christmas in London. So we'll see. You can get to that video, but we'll see if we'll make another one this year. Why look at me like that? Milk whiskers, ladies and gents. Perfectly normal. I'll just pretend I'm in a Got Milk ad. You were looking at me as though I was saying like really inappropriate stuff. I was like, I have a Christmas video. You were like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Goodness, YouTube gonna demonetize me. I'm not monetized. I don't believe I should monetize ever. Anyway, tangent. I love you, and I hope that you've enjoyed listening to my rambles, and let me know if you pick up any of these books, because trust me, they're good, apart from The Glass Castle. That was not good. By the way, if you've read The Glass Castle and you liked it, can you just let me know what I might have missed? I listened to the audiobook because I like to listen to memoirs on audio to kind of hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, but in this case that didn't make it better, and I was listening to it at 1.75 speed because I just wanted it to end. Anyway, I will see you really soon, and I had fun chatting with you guys, and I will see you down in the comments. By the way, also, Great Eggnog War of 2017. Do you like eggnog or do you not? If you don't like eggnog, we're going to have some serious conversations. So let me know your feelings about eggnog, your feelings about The Glass Castle, and your feelings about any of the other books that I discussed, or any of the books that you read during Nonfiction November. I'm always up for some nonfiction recommendations. I love it. I am going to go to bed and watch MasterChef now and go to sleep because we have a long drive back to LA tomorrow. Lots of love. Bye. My wave is weird and creepy.